The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Maynard Bangs presiding. Your eyes for the Honorable Judge Bangs.
Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of the Ladykillers, 1955, versus the Ladykillers, 2004. The Ladykillers is a crime comedy film about a group of 5 thieves who pose as a band of musicians in order to operate out of the house of an unsuspecting old woman. Now, in civil cases like this, the counsel appointed to represent each film will present their case for why their client is the superior movie. And ultimately, the jury will render its verdict as to which is, in fact, the better film. This decision will hereby stand in all rankings and all listicles from now on until the end of time, ad infinitum. Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, you are appearing on behalf of the Ladykillers, 1955. You may present your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I would just like to take a moment to say that I'm very happy that I was able to step in for this case. Big Ben was originally going to handle it, but seeing Jeremy Black on the docket, he chickened out.
I ran scared, man. Ridiculous.
Now, for my opening statement proper, we'll be fun of Ben again later. Today is a historic day. For the first time ever in Reels of Justice history, we are doing a head-to-head of remake versus the original. A cavalier American upstart versus a sophisticated Brit from the 50s. That's right, I do not merely mean our movies, but in many ways, I am the American remake of Jeremy Black. My countless books include America in the Age of Daniel Steele and my recently released The Importance of Being Columbo. And while my books contain more foul language and suggestive content, do not let that fool you into thinking I am better than the original. Why, just like these movies, the American flair is appreciated, but you can't beat the gentlemanly and bedrock principles that define the original. So please, let us honor our dear friend Jeremy by saluting British originality and authenticity by finding in favor of my client, the Ladykillers, 1955. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schlender. And I think we can all agree that in this case, the original is certainly better. Speaking of the original, on behalf of the Ladykillers, 2004, is Professor Jeremy Black. Please present your opening statement.
Well, friends, I can understand the last remark because it might seem curious to see me supporting the 2004 version. As you know, as the audience don't know, I was the one that suggested these two, and I picked and opted for the 2004. And that is because I agree the 1955 is excellent. I agree it is original. And on the whole, I do like first versions. But I think that in this particular case, the combination of Tom Hanks and the Coen brothers produced a film which, while honouring the original, actually took it a bit further. So I'd like to say they're both fantastic films, and I watched them again, obviously doing my prep, but I actually, again, and I had the support of my better half, and she said to me, which one are you going to go for? And I said the 2004 one, and she said to me, you're right. So there you go. There's the ultimate jury. Well, so no, I think Tom Hanks did it better, and I think the Coen brothers did it better. And one last point. If you actually want to think about what echoes in your head, I think that the 2004 version had fantastic music, which retained its originality. I got totally fed up listening to the Boccherini from the 1955.
Very fair, very fair. Thank you, Jeremy.
I love the Boccherina.
Yeah, I like it
Boccherina.
once, but not all the time.
I've heard that
way,
too many times in my life.
Behind your, does the audience see that waffle behind your head?
Oh yes.
My
Well,
waffle.
I mean, not in the audio version, but if we ever post the video, they certainly will.
You might like to say then that we're all being intimidated by this sight of a big waffle trying to digest one of our contributors.
If you sign up for Ryan's Patreon, we'll put the video.
Yeah,
there you go. We'll throw it to Mr. Schlender to begin his first exhibits.
Well, thank you very much, and I would also like to put out there how much I enjoyed both films as well. It's always nice when we do a head-to-head where both films are really good. But what's interesting about this is we actually do have the opportunity to really make some very, very strong comparisons between each film. And so the first subject I would like to address and bring to the court is the charm of each respective films. When we look at the professors from 1955 and 2004, we could see two actors, Alec Guinness and Tom Hanks, respectively, at near career highs as far as their acting prowess goes. And since each movie does not deviate very far from the characterization of each professor, that allows for a very proper head-to-head. And it is here where I think we can actually ding Hanks versus Guinness. And it's because his performance, it's undoubtedly intentionally hammy, right? Like he is not being restrained here at all. But I would say that choice, and it's certainly a choice that he made in conjunction with the Coen brothers here. It wasn't in a reading of the script, I'd imagine. It gives him more of an Ulianius quality that shows an immediate. Ulianius.
Oleaginous.
Uliaginous.
Well, what does it mean, counselor?
It's like
a creep. It means
it's like a little creep. Like
you could have just said that.
I could have, but I had to break out the thesaurus when we have the professor with us here, you know? So
yeah, but I'm dumb.
Yeah, that quality. Fair. So, but that quality, though, shows an immediate distrust with the viewer, right? And it's also so Tom Hanks kind of gives that up right away in a way that Alec Guinness does not, because Guinness, he reflects a very cool and gentlemanly sophistication right from when we meet him. So we're invited in with him very naturally, and we're more curious about him than we are about Hanks. His tone is less of that used car salesman and more of like a concerned concierge. He seems to be very worried about Mrs. Wilberforce, and he seems to be more connected to the events that were going on. He doesn't have that kind of larger than the situation presence that Hanks brings. And I think you get this all in his masterful delivery of the line when at the end of the movie he says, "We won't let them get you, Mrs. Wilberforce." You know, it's just it's just a pitch perfect delivery that, due to Hank's choices, he never had the opportunity to land something that perfect for the film in his dealings with Mrs. Munson. So that's my point on the charm of the respective professors. I think we give the edge to Mr. Guinness in this one.
So, question from the bench: are you saying Hanks came off as more of a creep, or Guinness?
Yes, I'm saying Hanks came off as a bit more of a creep, a larger than life personality. It was a choice. It works for that film. I'm not saying it was a bad choice, but I'm saying when you go professor for professor, Guinness presented the much more charming, believable, pull you in, you're along for the ride character than Hanks did.
Well, let's get an expert opinion from someone who actually is a professor. Jeremy, what do you think head to head, professor versus professor? Who takes it?
I think they're both fantastic. I think they're different. And I think the difference reflects the setting they're in, and each of them is excellent for it. Professor Marcus, the one played by Guinness, you first see him as a shadow. You first see him as that figure reaching out for looking at the card put on the newsagent's board about a room for sale, then the shadow looking into the house. And there is a kind of sinister, I mean, it's interesting, we did Vincent Price. There's a kind of sinister Vincent Price quality there, which is reflective of a dark, rather grungy post-war London, very depressing. No accident that it's a London of coal, you know, the coal lorries, all the rest of it. I think it's pitch perfect for that. Now, Hanks has, in a way, a harder task. I'm not saying that Guinness couldn't have done it, but it's a harder task to set it in Natchez, to set that story in a very different culture. What I thought was really interesting about Hanks is the way it is a film, not about America, but about the South. And I think, in a way, Hanks is the character who operates brilliantly with a much stronger female character than in the 1955 film. Mrs. Wilberforce is very two-dimensional. You know, she's played as very two-dimensional. I think that Irma Hall, who plays Mrs. Munson, is actually a much better actress. And in a way, the film is different. It's a dialogue between her and Tom Hanks.
I would object to that, but that's also going to be my next point, is comparing the ladies who would be killed. So if Jeremy wants to keep going, I'll bring that up. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Okay.
You may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. So I want to push back on what Jeremy was saying, but actually I do want to circle back to one thing. Is I think with Alec Guinness being the shadow person and reaching out creepily for the card, a lot of that is diffused immediately, though, when he's actually presented. And so it's kind of like a sigh of relief, like, oh, okay, he's kind of a normal, charming kind of guy. And then the movie takes off from there.
Absolutely sustained. I think Guinness has a menacing Karloff-esque kind of quality to it.
Yes.
Well, I guess we'll let the jury decide. I think Tom Hanks immediately coming in.
I'm on the jury, I can tell you.
Oh no, that's right. Well, not you, Maynard.
No, your
Bangs
twin
is on
is.
Oh no, he's Maynard
yes.
Bangs.
Very handsome.
Anyway, so I'm looking at Ryan. He's holding up the check bounce, so I'm out 2 jurors now. Okay, so getting back to the lady, the female leads in this here with Mrs. Wilberforce, and Mrs. Munson. I think Mrs. Wilberforce brings a lot more to the table, and I don't think calling her two-dimensional, I think that's a bit of an underhanded thing to say, because it's implying that it doesn't work as well as Mrs. Munson, but she really does. But the fact of the matter, she is a very simple, proper British lady, and that is how they're able to exploit her for her room and for her services of going to the train to extricate the money from the train yard. So she is actually a much more integral part of the plan. When your movie's called The Ladykillers, the lady should be really important. And I think that's something that the 1955 movie was able to do extremely well. They really brought her into that web, whereas Mrs. Munson is always just kind of removed from it. She doesn't seem to have the same kind of credibility with all of the other men. I mean, she does with Marlon Wayne's character, like they have that weird moment, but it's not the same way that everyone identifies with Mrs. Wilberforce. So like the idea of actually killing her seems like it's a much harder thing to grapple with, in which leads, I think, to the ultimately funnier series of events that lead to all the men eventually dying while trying to dispatch Mrs. Wilberforce. Whereas with Mrs. Munson, you just have to ask, why didn't they just send Mr. Ho? I mean, he seemed very capable of killing. They don't really explain why he wanted to draw the lots. Why not just have him do it? And I think you get a little more dimension in the British version with those men and their conflict with killing Mrs. Wilberforce. So
before we get too much into the men, I'd like to pass this off to Jeremy to speak a little bit more about this comparison of the two ladies.
Yes, I think Erman Hall is just a better actress. I think she's, I'm not denying that the Mrs. Wilberforce character, in order to, with actually having to go back to the railway station, plays a role in the plot, but I don't think she's made as complex. And I think in part, I think it's not only that she is the better actress, but I think also there is a longer film dimension to the 2004 version. And in that longer film version, you move past, as it were, almost a kind of single gag idea of the original. It is more complicated, the later film, I think. I think there's more play, for example, of the tensions within the gang and between the gang members. There is more chaos affecting them, not least the explosion with the plastic explosives, for example. And I think that the gag that you see with Mrs. Wilberforce always bringing up the tea, them always therefore having to break off. It's an element of slapstick there, rather like Professor Marcus with his long face, his teeth, his sort of skeleton-like impression. He's as it were an overacted gag. Tom Hanks, I'm not disagreeing with you in some respects. Tom Hanks, though, is playing it like a Southerner in this very curious, as it were, racial world, which is, I think, really interesting about the 2004 film. You've got the sheriffs, white and stupid. You've got Tom Hanks playing a white, brilliant man. He's playing at a professor. The person who actually has the moral consistency, and it's given a much more religious background, as befits, I suppose, a film set in the African Americans in the South, is the female character. And I think there's more depth there. I mean, to me, I thought it was much more interesting, but then maybe that's because I think that the American South, with the way in which there is often so much left unsaid because of the racial dimension, is in a sense more interesting than what was in 1955 a monochrome Britain. Now Britain isn't monochrome. Britain's a very different society. But in 1955 it was a monochrome Britain, and there was only so far they could go with the gags then. I mean, not least the kind of often abusive language of the 2004, which at times I found very irritating. And I have to tell you,
Mayor and I said that. We said that.
What's Jeremy going to think of this language?
Yeah.
I did find Marlon Wayans really irritating as a character, But I think within that context, it's therefore much more interesting, his relationship with, the older black woman, who is much more of a sort of moral center and reminds him of his mother.
And question from the bench: do you think Marlon Wayans is supposed to be irritating?
Yes, I'm sure he is. And I think he acts his role very well. I mean, I think it's quite interesting. I'm not saying here that one film is better than another in this.
Oh, you are. That's actually what we're doing here.
Yeah, I mean, just listen to me for a second on this. The gang in 1955 are some really first-rate actors, okay? I mean, I think Cecil Parker is very good. I think Herbert Lom is very good. I think Peter Sellers is very good. I'm not so interested in Danny Green as the heavy. I think
it was my favorite.
Yeah, all right, but
it's a great name. One Round.
Yeah, I know it's a one. I think they're great actors, but I think the extent to which they're allowed to play with their characters are much less than in the remake. I think J.K. Simmons, for example, is fascinating as his character with his IBS syndrome and the comedy about the IB singles weekend. I mean, it is so.
Stipulate that's a great gag, but I kind of I want to put a button on the differences between the women too, and kind of like how I did with Guinness and Hanks. Is I think it's just like one line's delivery that really puts them into stark contrast. And that's when Mrs. Wilberforce is talking about, I think it was her 21st birthday. She says, and then we got the news that the old queen died and everybody left. And that was it. It was just that flat end. And they're all very awkward looking at each other. Now, moving on to the gang, I think part of what Jeremy is talking about is definitely true. But it's also, I think, from design. And I think this is another strength of the 1955 version. The 1955 version is very concerned with like British common manners, being gentlemen, being ladies. And again, it's in that post-war period where things are a little darker. So things are a little more depressed. And I think that comes through very well in the gang. I think you have them all wanting to be respectful of Mrs. Wilberforce, but they're all very frustrated with their lot in life because, things weren't going great. But they want to maintain those kind of airs of manners. I mean, to the point where one round, the heavy, he kills Peter Sellers' character because he's so enraged, thinking he did kill Mrs. Wilberforce. Yeah, so yeah. I think you have that kind of simmering tension underneath them that is a very British thing to watch and observe. And when you look at what the American version does, it's kind of like, to use a very contemporary reference, if you look at like the American Office television show versus the British Office television show, yeah. A lot of the humor in the British version kind of comes from what people aren't saying and what they're looking at each other. And it's just like these long tension. Whereas the American one, just like the American Ladykillers, they kind of went all in on the big characterizations. And that's where you get J.K. Simmons and the IBS and just being like the big mustache and a larger than life personality, and Tom Hanks really hamming up the poetry reading. So instead of having kind of those subtle context clues that lend themselves to a sophisticated humor that we get in 1955, you just have this pure American pomp and bombacity represented in that gang. And I just feel it doesn't quite land as well because they're such larger than life personalities and characters. You see to be very easy for them to accomplish the task of robbing the bank. You would think it would be very easy for them to dispatch Mrs. Munson in a way where in the 55 version, you don't get that. You could see the tension, the conflict, and you do have this wonder, how are they going to resolve it? And it's funny along the way if you're paying attention.
Jeremy,
yes. I don't necessarily disagree with all that, but I'd be a bit more wary about thinking of the 55 version as necessarily more sophisticated. I mean, there's that very long passage with Frankie Howard, the Barrow boy. That's Frankie Howard's first major film role, and the way in which the Barrow gets destroyed. What I mean?
Yes, with the horse.
Quite frankly, I don't think that's any sophistication there at all. It's a kind of classic pantomime humor sort of stuff. And I think there is that pantomime element in the 1955 one. Interestingly enough, they recently, it was about 4 years ago, turned the 1955 version into a play, which I saw. It went around the country, and I saw it when it came to Exeter. And it very much comes across in a play form, and I realise we're not talking about the play, we're talking about the film, but it very much comes across as a pantomime, not least the very end. In both films, there is this pantomime element in which one by one they all get killed. Mm-hmm. I mean, there is a moment of humour there. And interestingly enough, the American version goes, of course, for what it considers the literary irony. I mean, the British one doesn't have that at all, which is with the raven, the Edgar Allan Poe reference. It's the raven sitting on the head that deals with the professor. Whereas in the British one, it's simply the rail signal coming down and bonking him on the head. And I think that in a way, I think they are both. I know you'd like me to say one's better than the other, and I do like the 2004 one, but I think they're both trying to be similar in very different contexts. And part of the question is, what do you make of those contexts? And that kind of comic film set in the South, with a real kind of edge of a kind of William Faulkner on speed element of it, is unusual. Most people wouldn't have seen it. Whereas the thing about Alec Guinness in 1955 is, here we are, he's brilliant. We know he's brilliant. The gang is good. But here we are with yet another bloody Ealing comedy, yet again doing it. There is a slightly formulaic quality there to it. Whereas I think Tom Hanks was not doing it in a formulaic one. It was rather different to the previous Coen Brothers films, or in my view it is anyway. I think it's got much more irony in it and much more humour, real humour, than a lot of the Coen Brothers stuff. I mean, but then that's just my personal view. I know.
Yeah, I didn't think Fargo was funny at all.
Well,
That last scene was
just kind of funny looking. No, but so I see where Jeremy's coming from here, and actually that's something I was thinking about a lot, is how the 1955 version, it almost kind of reminded me a bit more of like, it had a stage play kind of quality to it, and I mean that in a good way, not in a boring way, Ryan.
Yeah.
So don't interpret it that way, in an exciting way. And
No, I agree with you.
yeah, oh good, oh no, oh good, and so it's I don't know if that's good or bad.
Please refrain from talking
It's
directly
good.
to the jury.
It's good.
Oh, good. So, but no, it has that quality, and it's a very starchy movie. And the Coen brothers are not starchy. That is 100% sure. So the context that you're talking about that you want the jury to consider, I think, is definitely that level of rigidness. So if 55 is very rigid, 2004 is not. Same story, one going really up that straight line with 55, and then 2004 going like crazy. I love that we're doing this on Zoom because it lets me talk with my hands. So
Other people can't see that.
They-
Jeremy, do
they-
you have any
they can't.
rebuttals to those points?
no, I don't. I mean, I think we're agreeing. This must
Yeah.
make. I mean, what's wrong with that? We're agreeing. I mean, I would say 2004, of course. Also, they've got more money. I think I looked it up. I think they spent 76 million on it, which would have been way more than was. I mean, the 1955 one, in some respects, is a single set with some outdoor shooting. Okay.
Yeah.
I think they've got many more opportunities in the 2004 one. I mean, you might say, if you wanted to criticize the 2004 one, you could say that as a result of that, it's less tight. It's much less tight as a film, but it's trying for a different sense of humor. The 1955 one has a slight degree of, here we are all stuck in this house, all stuck on this single set. What is going to happen? Whereas the 2004 one can wander all over the place as it moves the plot forward. It's less focused on the house.
no, and that's fair. And so, Your Honor, I'll just bring up my last point here, and we'll kick it over
About
to Jeremy
time.
proper. Yeah, and I just so, and this is a very small thing, but I think it's worth the consideration of the jury and for people listening at home and for the Patreon subscribers watching on YouTube. That is, the 2004 version has almost a supernatural element to it. And I know the Coen brothers are weird. Like we said, it's definitely not starchy. But you have the cat almost seems divinely inspired, dropping the finger into the barge, escaping when it's needed. The portrait of the husband, his facial expression changes after the explosion. I postulate that maybe you can read some subtext into it's the husband's spirit is guiding in events, and then that's like the raven landing on the statue too. So it has a small supernatural, otherworldly charm to it. And also their plan, I love the plan of doing the tunnel. All that's great. There's a lot of things that can go wrong when you collapse a tunnel, though. Like what does that look like above ground? Why are there no cameras in the casino office? I mean, J.K. Simmons almost certainly would have been caught on a camera when they had to bring him out to use the bathroom. You would think there would be cameras in the vault proper. There's no reason not to. And you would think it would be more reinforced because of the potential for flooding damage that you could have. So you wouldn't just have a brick wall against the dirt because the water could get in. But that's pretty nitpicky, I admit. And I do think the 1955 version, that wouldn't have worked with security cameras and facial recognition softwares and all that stuff, so it definitely works in the context of the time. It's a hard premise to revamp, and 2004 did an okay job of it, but 1955 is just a bit tighter in that delivery. And that's the last point I want to bring up. I think the starchiness, that context that Jeremy was mentioning, I think it, in the sum, it tips the scales in favor of 1955, and I'll rest on that.
All right, thank you. Jeremy, you may proceed with any exhibits you have remaining.
Thank you. Well, I think we've heard a really good presentation of an excellent film, and I'm just trying to offer a slightly different nuance, not to imply that my view is the only view to approach, but simply to say that in adapting the plot, the script writers, the directors and the actors produced, I would say, a genuine work of Southern Gothic. Ooh. And I think Southern Gothic is a very interesting cultural trope. I don't think it always has sufficient understanding within the United States, because I think often the presentation of the South is done so in a very different way. I agree with what we've just heard about the supernatural, but I would say it's much more literary. I would say it is much more about Edgar Allan Poe via William Faulkner. I would say it's much more that. And I don't think it's any accident that the professor has his strong literary interests more than the music interest, which is what you get with Professor Marcus. So I think as an example of comic Southern Gothic on speed in a kind of weird way, it's actually rather brilliant, given also some very modern humor, as we've heard mention about Simmons or the finger or whatever. I think both of the protagonists are very good. I think Hanks has to play a harder role, because I think it is a harder role, because I think that Guinness, who does it brilliantly, is actually asked to play essentially one part in a relatively short film. I think Hanks's role is more spread out. It's also made much harder because I think the lady he's dealing with is actually much harder to persuade than Mrs. Wilberforce. Mm. I also think that, I'm very flattered your idea that the British are sophisticated. I think there is a completely slapstick element to 1955. The constant bringing of the cups of tea, the Frankie Howard, etc. I just think this is pure slapstick. Professor Marcus is some sort of sinister figure out of a horror film. I think this is all really slapstick elements. The attitude of the police, these are all slapsticks. I'm not saying that the American police come across as brilliant, but no. I think that I don't think that there is this difference here. I do find the female character better in the 2004 version. I think the color palette is more interesting. The actual filming is more interesting. The variety of the scenes, for example, the way in which the police station is done, the way in which, is really, from the outside is really quite interesting. And I also think the music in the 2004 one is amazing. The gospel choirs, the very, very varied soundtrack. I think that's fantastic. So for those reasons, I would go with it as a better film, but drawing on a fantastic original. And lastly, I know that Rotten Tomatoes and other critics have given the Coen brothers a hard time over that film. And in part, what I'm saying is, look, you might prefer the 1955 version, but don't use that as a reason. I'm not saying anybody here is doing that, but it's not right for critics to then use it as a reason to write off the Coen brothers version in 2004.
All right. Thank you very much. Both sides have rested their cases. Mr. Schlender, you may proceed with your closing arguments.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would just like to say, I'm sure our closings are probably pretty similar. We are talking about two very fine movies here. 2004's interpretation brought a lot to the table. You know, it wasn't just a straight up remake, but we have to look at the fact that it was drawing from very, very strong source material and very, very strong performances. I do think Alec Guinness gets the edge over Hanks as being a charming professor type. I think Mrs. Wilberforce's character is more well realized than Mrs. Munson, and the story in 55 does a much better job of folding her in to the plot, making her a little more integral and not just the object of to be killed, hence the title, The Ladykillers. So I do think she gets a bit more to do that's interesting and fun, whereas Mrs. Munson was just kind of poo-pooing things right out the gate. So when you go into that jury room, this is our first head-to-head original versus remake. Two good movies. This won't be like when we do Psycho versus Psycho, and it's gonna be very one-sided. Right?
Or RoboCop.
Yeah, Gus Van Sant all the way.
Yeah,
or
Total
Recall versus Total Recall.
A Total Recall versus Total Recall, right? No. This is a tough one, and you have a lot to think about. And I'm just saying, consider the time, 1955, those sophisticated British airs, and how much that brought to the table, and how much we still get from it today. So thank you very much for your time. And God bless the UK.
Thank you, Mr. Schlender. Jeremy, you may proceed with your closing argument.
Thank you. Well, I dare say actually the UK can do with all the help it can get from any source at the moment. Yes, they're two excellent films. I would actually like to suggest something slightly different, that although they're both using the same plot basis, actually they're also two very different films, though. One is an Ealing comedy, and Ealing comedies were one of the more successful groups of the post-war British films. And one is a Southern Gothic, almost one-off triumph. And I think in judging them, the problem is that we look at them as similar, but they're different. They're very different. The Southern Gothic is, I think, drawing on a whole set of attitudes and assumptions, and the complexity of society in the South, and the complexity of racial attitudes, the complexity of the role of religion, the actual subtext of is there providence, is what they're singing about going to happen, is, as it were, you know, whose magic, white and black magic, is playing a role in this film. I think actually those are really interesting aspects of the 2004 one, irrespective of whether you prefer the Alec Guinness version to the Tom Hanks version. So I would say both are excellent films, but the 2004 one gives us a cultural resonance that's really quite distinctive and that is worth thinking about. A cultural resonance which is very hard to capture well in the United States, in part because so many filmmakers don't really understand the complexities, difficulties of a particular view of the South, the one I would describe as Southern Gothic.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. Members of the jury, Mr. Robb Maynard, Mr. Big Ben Haslar, and Mr. We Must Have Waffles Forthwith, Ryan Luis Rodriguez. You have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine which film is the superior movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict.
Right this way. Ryan must have his waffles. He must have his waffles. He must think every last one of you to the best of your ability.
We didn't coordinate that. It just worked.
Ryan's going to be so upset when there's no waffles in that jury room.
So wait a second. You're telling me there are no waffles? This is bullshit. God damn. I was really hoping for some waffles. All right. What are we thinking, guys? Ben.
Okay, I went into both of these blank. I'm not a big Coen Brothers fan. I think they're good, but I think they're a little overrated. So I didn't see the Ladykillers. I saw the trailer and it just sort of floated by me. So when I went into this and I watched the first one and I thought this is very much a stage play. I was kind of surprised to hear that was adapted because I was like, this is all one location, and this is kind of the medium I would expect to see this in. Whereas when we switch over to the Coen brothers film, I like that this was a remake. This is a true good remake in that it has something new to say with the old source material. Usually when you have a remake, it's just sort of rehashing points, but with better special effects. These guys have more money and they use that to their advantage. I like the dynamic characters in the newer one much more than in the old one, although I do think Alec Guinness and Tom Hanks might be a little bit more on a level playing field. The rest of the crew much funnier in the remake, at least to my viewing.
I think the crew in the remake is, as you said, it's more distinct. They're right. They're more archetypical, but they've boiled it down. Whereas it's like, what is really the major in the first one? I mean, he's just kind of the guy with the mustache. It's only really the killer and the heavy that have a lot like real personality in the other one.
Mm-hmm.
So this is interesting because I think I'm the only one here who doesn't like the remake.
Why is that?
Yeah. I unlike Ben, I am a huge Coen Brothers fan, and I swear by them. But I saw this movie opening weekend with my dad, and even then I knew this is possibly their weakest film. There's something about it. I didn't know how to quantify it then, but now having seen the original is one of the rare comedies with dramatic tension. Like the scene where the cello case breaks open and all the money spills out. I knew something like that was coming because there's an analog to it in the remake. But when that happened, even knowing that something like that was going to happen, I audibly gasped. Yeah. I literally went like, oh shit. And I never had that feeling watching the remake. I always feel like it's kind of going through the motions. Like I don't think that it's a bad movie per se, but I think that it's okay. And I think that's damning by faint praise.
One of the things I found interesting that the prosecution said is that he thought the criminals in the remake were more competent, and thus that they should have had because I mean, their plan is better. But I disagree with it because I think they're more incompetent. Like, I mean, their fuses go off at the wrong time. They're constantly arguing. They get fired from the job. The general won't stop smoking. They're not good criminals. Whereas, in the first one, they are very competent. I mean, their plan basically goes off without a hitch until that moment you mentioned. Yeah.
He just thinks British accents are equals sophisticatedness.
Yeah, that was an interesting sort of point that was brought up. While I do think that there's the gentlemanly nature that is sort of holding the men back in the original, I think there's a lot of that in the second one. I mean, Mr. Pancake and the professor, I mean, they're not okay with just killing an innocent old woman. Lump is clearly opposed to it. And
he's the one guy I didn't like in the remake. They didn't bring him up, but this guy's too stupid.
Yeah, he's too stupid. I agree. I that's why I like the heavier better in the other, because while he is dumb, he has a few great little one-liners, and he finally stands up for the little woman, and I think that gives him a lot of personality. But Ryan, you could continue.
No, I was just going to say, like, the things that I appreciate the remake for are the aesthetics. Like, it looks amazing, which is to be expected because it's Roger Deakins who shot all of the Coen Brothers movies and is possibly our greatest living cinematographer.
Almost all of the outdoor ones in the first one are like against a green screen that just like scream at you.
And I think that the cast in the remake is sensational for the most part. Like, Tom Hanks never really played a character before who was unrepentantly evil throughout the entire film. They never give him any instance where you can see, oh, there's some humanity in that guy. He's playing the worst human being on the face of the earth and doing it well, clearly relishing the fact that he doesn't get to play villains ever. Like, he's known as the nice guy. Yeah. And I think that one of the other great successes in the cast is, of course, J.K. Simmons, who cannot play a false note if he tried, even if his entire character is the guy who really has to shit. That's all he does. Every single scene when there's a complication, it's, he's got to take a crap. Warp.
What about Marlon Wayans?
Marlon, irritating in a way that, and the way that he's portrayed as this possibly the dumbest member of the crew aside from Lump, feels a little racist, just a little bit, and that was I was looking through Letterboxd, kind of looking at some of the people that I follow and their reactions to this film, and that was something that came up a lot, was that supposedly this film had racist undertones, and a lot of that was directed at Marlon Wayans' character, and I can kind of see it, but at the same time, I wouldn't go that far.
It's a point I kind of brought up after we watched it yesterday, only because, like, you know, is there a person of color in this film who's competent? I mean, but I guess, I mean, we can't say that the general's not a person of color. He is, and he's extremely competent. He's probably the most competent in the whole crew, maybe. Anyway, Ben, do you want to share some more thoughts and lock in a? Well, no, you're the foreman, aren't you? Well,
No, Ryan's the foreman.
No, I'm the. Yeah.
Oh, good, Ben. Why don't you lock in something? And I'll see how I feel.
I think the remake hits its notes better that it's aiming for, and more importantly, it stays with me longer than the first one did. So it accomplished all its goals. I think the remake's superior.
All right. I'll go on record too, although you may not like it, Ryan. I did always like this movie, and I'm not that big of a Coen Brothers mark. But I remember I probably watched this movie a dozen times or so throughout high school. I think there's a ton of color to basically the whole crew. You know, they're colorful characters, you know, besides the black and white differences from the original, which I hadn't seen until now. I really enjoyed the original. I thought it was a great movie. But I think that they flesh out the characters and the crew better in the remake. The world is a little bigger and brighter. If I had any nitpicky problems, like the way the crew kills each other off in the original makes sense. They really all kill each other. The fact that like Lump shoots himself in the head and then a dumb statue falls on Tom Hanks, that stuff's dumb. I wish they hadn't kind of done I wish they hadn't knocked off some of those characters the way they chose.
The cat was good though. I liked the cat.
The cat wasn't bad, the way he trips up the general. So I don't have a problem with how the first three go. It's just sort of that final scene. It was just kind of like, we need to end the movie now. And we still have two guys alive. How fast can we kill them off? That's kind of one of the big nitpicks that I would have. But otherwise, I am going to go with the remake, 2004.
All right, so my vote here does not matter one fucking bit.
But
so,
your opinion,
matters to me.
Your opinion matters to
me.
us, Ryan.
But
I need to hear it.
I am 100% in favor of the original over the remake. I think that I haven't really made that ambiguous so far. I think that it's at least twice as good.
Wow.
But hey, I acknowledge that the remake has its benefits, and clearly it's the more popular one in this jury room. So I guess I have to make my peace with that. But I'm sticking by the original.
That's just this jury room, because it's certainly not the popular opinion that I've seen online. But what I always think is funny is Johnny Depp plays a really over the top pirate in 2003. But then Tom Hanks plays a really over the top evil Southern professor in 2004, and people weren't happy with it. So strange.
All right, well, let's go back and tell that very handsome judge.
So handsome. Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of the Ladykillers versus the Ladykillers, we find in favor of the Ladykillers.
Yeah!
Which one is that?
Oh, 2004.
Oh, thank you. The verdict is so rendered. The Ladykillers 2004 is hereby declared the superior film. My sincerest apologies to Alec Guinness, but his version was not the film we were looking for. Court is adjourned.
Shut it down.
This is Major Reporter Schlender. You lost. Thoughts?
Well, it's always a delight to have Jeremy on. We always get to talk about interesting movies. I love the points he brought up about Southern Gothic, and just to give you a tease, the next Jeremy episode, he will be defending Flowers in the Attic. You know, let's see you win that one, hotshot.
Jeremy Black, same question. What is thought?
I agree with everybody that both of them are great films. I think we've done fantastically well. We've had a really interesting discussion, and I hope people listening go out now and watch both of them and enjoy both of them, because there's lots in both of them to enjoy, including their differences.
Thank you. Back to studio now.
Were you a caveman, Ben? I don't.
No, he was the major from 2004, not from 1950.
Oh well, that's not going to age well. Oh,
well, don't let the mustache fool you. Oh wait, no, there's video now, so I can't make that joke.
He had a mustache. I missed that.
No, Ben. They both had mustaches. They very mustache.
Anyway, thank you,
Jeremy. Number six for you on Reels of Justice. How does it feel, Jeremy Black, to be the most well-represented guest in the show's very distinguished history?
Our unofficial co-host.
I feel very honored, and I just hope you don't get fed up with me.
Oh, no.
Not as long as you keep bringing good cases and beating Dylan.
Yeah.
Although we should mention you were supposed to beat Ben, but Ben chickened out.
I had the opportunity to do Wild Wild West. Come on, you don't walk away from that.
I don't see it as beating anybody. I see it as having a conversation, and I'm playing to the rules within your context, within your paradigm. But I don't mind if you decide in all of them not to have a vote, or you decide beforehand that I'm going to lose. That doesn't cause me any problems. What I think is great is to encourage people to think about films opposed to each other, and linked to that, and maybe changing the tone, maybe we could think about doing something like comparing Shrek 2 and Paddington 2 or something like that. Or is anybody else, I
know who's going to win that one.
That's out there.
Kurosawa, come on, man. Kurosawa.
No. That's the Shrek 2 Paddington 2 is out there now. We are making it happen.
I don't want to watch Shrek 2. No.
I don't either. I don't watch
now that I know they don't want to watch it, we're definitely doing it.
No.
Yes.
I refuse.
So Jeremy,
obviously, watched it already. I mean, you can't not have watched Shrek 2 already.
I have managed to dodge that bullet, sir, and you're firing.
That's impossible. So Jeremy, when you sent us that email, Maynard and I were out on the town, and you sent that suggesting that, and I said, Maynard's like, "What is Jeremy watching?" I'm like, maybe he had his grandkids over.
No. I've watched both of them when they came out.
Yeah. Because Jeremy was like, let's do Paddington 2 and Bridget Jones' Diary. It was like, what a marathon Jeremy's in right now.
The alternative is Bridget Jones's Diary and Pride and Prejudice, the one with Colin Firth in, because he's in both of those, okay? And, there you've got How Far is Bridget Jones's Diary, a modern remake of Pride and Prejudice. That would, again, be a good one.
That would be, but you literally wrote the book about Jane Austen, so I feel we would be at a disadvantage going against you.
I wrote the book on Stone Cold Steve Austin.
So actually, and so speaking of your books, Jeremy, you did have England in the Age of Austen. I believe that came out recently, and The Importance of Being Perot came out at the end of this last October. So like how are they doing, and what other books you got coming down the pike here?
The books that have just come out, Yale's just published A Short History of War by me, which was favorably reviewed in the Wall Street Journal, and I've just brought out A History of the Caribbean as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah, you and I have something in common, Jeremy. We're both published authors, so here we are, two peers sitting.
Right. No, that's exactly. Well, another thing we have in common is you're sitting in front of a thing for a Waffle House, and I've been to a Waffle House too.
See, two peas in a pod, really. But I can plug this, that we had a book. I had a book with Frank Dietz and some other friends come out recently, all about our favorite science fiction and horror films of the past and present. And I wrote several essays about Godzilla. So, just a couple. Only 100 more books to go before I catch up to you.
But are you listed as the host of Reels of Justice?
Actually,
I did.
Damn it. But Ryan, we got to get some books out there.
I said a host. I said a host.
Oh, that's
of Reels
better.
of Justice.
That's better.
Not
I mean, I could do a coloring book. I don't know if I could do like a real book.
Oh, well, that is a real book. So Jeremy, we always ask for recommendations from our guests for movies that you think people should see. So what should people check out?
Well, the last film I've seen is the new James Bond film.
Mm-hmm. I watched it last night preparing for you to say that.
Right. Has everybody seen it?
Yes, we have.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Well, I wrote a review of it on the website of The Critic. I mean, it's both good and bad. I mean, it's bad in the sense the plot is a real jumble, which reflects actually how it was made. Different writers came in and you get plot lines that are thrown away and bits of it which really make even less sense than usual. On the other hand, I do think that Craig brings it off very well in his role, playing his version of Bond. And I do think it has some pretty good sort of set pieces.
Yeah.
You know, I went into it thinking, oh my God, I've got to write a review of this. It goes on for bloody ever. Am I going to be able to sustain it? Because it's the longest Bond ever. I came out feeling two things. One, this had been much more interesting than I thought it was going to be. And two, I found the last 10 minutes quite cathartic.
Oh, really? I didn't like the ending, but I don't want to spoil.
I didn't like it. I found it cathartic, though. I didn't like it at all. But I found it it grabbed me much more than I thought it would.
So what do you think?
I liked it better than Spectre.
Is it a contender for Reels of Justice? Do you want to come on and prosecute it, or?
I'll prosecute it.
I don't think it's one of the best of the Bond films. I'll be quite clear of that. It lacks humor. I think that it doesn't really have any sex appeal.
Anna de Armas, come on.
Anna de Armas, who's in the movie for 5 minutes.
Yeah, where did she go? Where did she go?
Disappears.
She just disappears.
Exactly.
And the point is, it has no sex appeal because there's no real sexual interplay. I mean, the whole point between her and Craig is that they're not sexually interplaying. Yeah. She is acting with the camera. She's not acting with him.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real big difference there in the sexuality. It's
better than Spectre, though, right?
Sorry?
Better than Spectre.
I need to see it one more time because, like, I don't like the ending of Spectre, but I like 80% of Spectre.
You like that Batista's in it.
I like that Batista's in it. I dislike that Batista's not in it longer. In many ways, Batista is the Anna de Armas of Spectre. We needed more. We needed more.
And he wears the same outfits too.
Yes. Oh, she does look great in that dress, and so does he. But yeah, I watched it last night because I'm like, I know Jeremy's going to say something about it, and I can't, not have seen it. So, now it's out everywhere. You can stream it from the comfort of your own home. So, but yeah. I liked a lot of. I loved the ending set pieces. The big island with loved all that. That was great, and I even liked the villain. I liked Rami Malek, and I don't hate his plan, although it's kind of absurd. But
he was better in A Night at the Museum.
But yeah, we'll let everyone see it and make up their minds about the ending themselves, and then it's like, well, where do we go now? That's what's going to be interesting to see where we go next.
Speaking of where we're going next, since I was the other lawyer, I'll do my recommendation.
No one cares, but fine.
I know.
Oh, yes, we do.
Everyone's here for Jeremy. So actually, cards on the table. I like the 2004 Ladykillers just by probably like a hair. I really enjoyed the original a lot, though. And we watched it for this case. So I'm going to recommend what's usually considered a really bad Tom Hanks movie, but it has a charm to it that I just find very endearing and has really stuck with me. Our good friend Ryan. No, Ryan's always talking about like movies that slip off the brain, and that's usually when they're not good. But there was something about this movie that's just really stuck with me, and that's 1982's Mazes and Monsters. And
the Dungeons and Dragons movie.
It's the Dungeons and Dragons movie, but hear me out. It's a little more complicated than just being like a D&D Panic kind of movie. Tom Hanks's character is going through some very serious mental health issues, very serious abandonment issues, and the static character of his brother who had ran away is a very powerful, it's almost Tennessee Williams-esque. There's the quote for you, Maynard. And I just found the movie, it has just a way of sticking with you, and it has some charm. And the ending, it's not even that uplifting, and it's a little depressing, but it's the way that movie had to end. And I'm looking at it. I don't know.
I was going to say I'm sold.
Yeah, but because I'm looking at right now on IMDb, and they're saying it's like a 4.1 out of 10, and I think the movie has more to offer than what that score would portend. So that's my recommendation. Mazes and Monsters, 1982.
You could also recommend Dungeons and Dragons, which also has Marlon Wayans, doesn't it?
It does, but I was also thinking about Night at the Museum because that has Rami Malek. So,
well, so since the topic of today's case was Ladykillers, I decided to recommend another black and white comedy about ladykillers, but in an entirely different sense, and that's 1944's Arsenic and Old Lace.
Oh, yes, that's a great film. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's about two kindly old women who poison elderly bachelors who come looking for a room to rent, believing they're ending their suffering. Their nephew, who believes he's Teddy Roosevelt, then buries the bodies of the victims in their basement.
Whilst he digs the Panama Canal down there.
Yes, he thinks they're yellow fever victims. It stars Cary Grant as their other nephew, the non-crazy one, who, of course, is appalled when he discovers the news, as it's certain to put a damper on his upcoming honeymoon. It's directed by Frank Capra, who I've heard is a pretty good hand at these sort of things. Arsenic and Old Lace isn't streaming free anywhere at the moment, so you'll have to.
If you have the TCM app, it pops up like every month.
Oh, okay. There you go. Get the TCM.
That's where
app.
I saw it. I saw it a couple of weeks ago, and Cary Grant gives the greatest facial expressions possibly of any movie ever. Just there's a whole range on his face that plays out over the course of 2 hours that is just truly delightful.
Yeah. I was in the a staged version of it in high school.
With
you play?
I was Teddy Roosevelt. I was Teddy Brewster.
It also has it has a very benign view of the police, a singularly benign view of the police.
Yes, I believe Dylan was one of the police.
I was it Sergeant Rooney, Lieutenant Rooney?
Yeah. I think that was right, Lieutenant Rooney.
Lieutenant, yeah.
Big Ben, what do you got for us?
I'm going to recommend mine with the rather large caveat that I don't think it's worth subscribing to Apple Plus or whatever it is just for this. I caught it at the Alamo Drafthouse. But I'm going with Tom Hanks' newest movie, Finch, which features him as a man wading the hardships of the apocalyptic wasteland with his dog, and he builds a robot named Jeff to take care of his dog when he passes. Tom Hanks delivers a great performance, as he always does, and his naive yet very eager to learn robot has a great dynamic with him. It's a destination is the journey kind of film, but I, for one, had a lot of fun on that journey, so check it out.
A lonely man builds robot companions.
Hey, don't look too deep into this. Don't look too deep into this. Yeah, no, I will say there are other films that did this concept better, but this one didn't do it poorly.
Does Tom Hanks and his robot
silent
dogs
running is what you're saying?
Yeah. Do they start watching bad movies and talking through them?
Well, how does he eat and breathe?
You have to watch the movie and see.
And other science facts.
Yeah, Ryan, what have you got?
Going from what I believe is the weakest Coen Brothers movie to my favorite, my recommendation this week is Raising Arizona, an endearingly idiosyncratic confection stuffed to the brim with stellar performances and brilliant dialogue. And it also stands as possibly the most miraculously photographed comedy of the 1980s, if not of all time. And it's currently streaming on Amazon Prime.
Streaming.
I ain't gonna say that.
Jeremy, have you seen these? Have you seen Raising Arizona?
I haven't. No, I have to confess I haven't.
You should see Raising Arizona.
It's good, yeah.
You should follow Ryan's recommendations. Those are the movies that are
Cage.
really worth watching.
Yeah, I mean,
you probably don't need to watch Mazes the Monster.
Nicolas Cage can't do any wrong, I believe.
Neither can Holly Hunter.
And Holly Hunter.
But with that, we look forward to having Jeremy join us again. And we're gonna do Shrek 2, you said, and Paddington 2.
No.
Yes.
No.
Okay, Bridget
I'm in my
Jones's
safe room,
Diary.
Ryan. We'll lock ourselves in.
Well, it certainly varies the genre, doesn't it?
A little bit.
And of course, Jeremy, we wish you happy holidays and all that.
Same to yourselves. You've got Thanksgiving coming up, so enjoy it in your Waffle Hut.
At this point,
is a Waffle Hut a survivalist idea? Is it actually for people across America that the idea is that they think the end of the world is coming, so they go to their local Waffle Hut, go down into the basement and can eat waffles whilst the apocalypse is
I
coming?
didn't know that, but now it's gonna be.
Yeah.
Now I say bring on the apocalypse.
Yeah, I know them as always having the
Wait for
smothered
this whole thing to
covered.
blow
I mean, that's
over.
Waffle House, but I mean that's basically the analog, right? So but really by the time this airs, Thanksgiving happened weeks ago and we all had a great time.
Oh yeah, it was great.
It wasn't a fifth COVID wave or anything like that. Right?
Yeah. No, it was
God,
great.
Ben, if you're right about that.
God, I tell you what, though, I didn't have Any turkey because Ben was too much chicken.
I'm happy to do either Shrek 2 or Paddington 2. So you just pick whichever one
Thought you wanted to do a head-to-head. Shrek 2
Seven Samurai versus
Paddington
Yojimbo.
2.
Come on, let's do it. Seven Samurai versus Yojimbo.
No. You
No.
pay your dues with
decide
Paddington.
and just tell me.
We'll do
You
Seven
decide.
Samurai versus Magnificent Seven as we should.
That
Okay,
is
yeah,
one we
that's
should
fine.
do. All right, but yeah,
with
we'll
that,
be in touch.
We're all out of show. But we want to thank Jeremy for joining us, and he will be back very soon. And we hope everyone else will join us again as well as the Reels of Justice keep turning.
Count it.
Waffles.
Cheers, Ben.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.